learning. For many, it's a fraud. And we should be honest enough. They just learn one box of tricks and it becomes obsolescent, and they have to learn another. In addition, the second dimension is they have volatile, low earnings, and they've lost the non-wage benefits that the salariat and the old proletariat were used to acquiring. No paid leave, no paid medical leave, no prospect of occupational pensions. They have to rely on money wages. And in the process, people in the precariat everywhere are living on average on the level of unsustainable debt. One mistake, one illness, one accident, and they realize they could be the bag lady in the street with all their belongings in a couple of paper bags. Huge numbers of people have those feelings. It affects their health. It affects their longevity. It leads to suicides. In addition, the third dimension is that this is the first mass class in history which is actually in the process of losing the rights of citizenship. Losing les droits acquis, as they say in France. Acquired rights. Losing civil rights, losing social rights, losing economic rights because they can't practice what they're trained to practice. Losing political rights because they do not see in the political spectrum a party or movement representing them. And in the process, the worst feature of being in the precariat is you feel like a supplicant. You have to rely on people for discretionary judgments and charity. As David Hume, the famous philosopher, said, charity is akin to contempt. It's pity. They have to rely on asking favors. Now, of course, the precariat suffers from what I've called in the books 4 A's: anxiety, alienation, anomie, a feeling of hopelessness, and anger. And I said on page 1 of the original edition of the Precariat, which was published in 2011, I said, unless politicians and analysts come to understand the precariat, we will see the emergence of a political monster with a politics of inferno. In 2016, I was invited, very strangely, given my politics, to address the Bilderberg Group. The Bilderberg Group is the elite right-wing movement that's existed since 1954. I thought it was a joke. I initially didn't accept, but then people persuaded me to go. And I was talking about the precariat, and I spent 3 days sitting next to the primary funder of Donald Trump. And in November of that year, I got a deluge of emails from around the world saying, your monster has arrived. And it's gone on since then, because I think the atavistic part of the precariat, the less educated, the people who feel they've lost the past was better than today, these people listen to the populists, they listen to the fascists promising to bring back yesterday. Make America great, make Europe great, make UK great, whatever. They listen to these people. The progressive part of the precariat do not see in the spectrum a party that represents them, and what they have been doing is absconding from the electoral process. People should realize that Donald Trump did not get a majority of the Americans to support him. He got 30%. Anybody who says he got a majority is forgetting that a large number of people are not voting because they do not see the future being offered. That is the context of this conference. Now, we are at a crisis point in the global transformation, the painful construction of a global market economy. Those of you who are social scientists will recognize that this is analogous to Karl Polanyi's great book, The Great Transformation. We've gone through a period when finance has become dominant to the extent of completely dominating economic policy, social policy, privatization, education, healthcare. Private equity is eating up and building huge profits for financiers. And it reminded me of a term used by William Beveridge in his famous report that defined the welfare state of not only Britain, but many other countries, and shaped it even where they had Bismarckian traditions of welfare systems. And Beveridge wrote, "This is a time for revolutions, not for patching." He could say that because he was anything but a revolutionary himself. He was a staid old civil servant who was very unfrightening. But his 5 giants, he said, they have to be slain. The 5 giants were disease, ignorance, idleness, squalor, and want. Well, I would like to suggest that at this critical point in the global transformation, while those 5 giants have not been defeated across the world, we have a situation where there are 8 modern giants that are stopping the building of a beautiful future. The first giant is gross inequalities. Inequalities where we have inequality of wealth being much greater than the inequality of income, and we have inequality in many other respects, including time itself. The inequality of time. I've written a book called The Politics of Time, and it's all about how the inequalities of time determine life's chances and life's health and longevity. If you're in the precariat, you have no control of your time. You have to do what you have to do to survive, to keep going. Whereas if you're in the leisurely classes, you have as much control of your time as you choose. The Elon Musks claim to work 100 hours a week. Maybe they do, but they should work less in my view. But for the precariat, they have no such control. The second giant is insecurity. This is a pandemic in itself. Insecurity erodes the mental bandwidth. It erodes the capacity to be rational, to make decisions about a future. Anybody who's experienced a period of prolonged insecurity knows what I'm talking about. But today we have a very different type of insecurity than the type that Beveridge and before him Bismarck and the Swedish architects of the Swedish model, some of whom were my friends, particularly Rudolf Meidner, they were dealing with a different age. They were dealing with an industrial age. Today, we don't have this old contingency risks for which you can build a social insurance system because you can predict the probability of a shock and predict how to pay for it, etc. We are living in an age of chronic uncertainty. For an economist, uncertainty is different from ordinary risk. It's about unknown unknowns. You cannot predict when you're going to be hit by a shock. You cannot predict who is going to be hit by a shock. And you cannot respond to uncertainty with targeted, selective, means-tested, conditional social security schemes. The targeting errors are huge. I've just been studying a targeted scheme in Thailand, targeted on the poor. We found that over 50% of the beneficiaries were non-poor. They know how to operate the system. A great majority of the poor were not getting any help at all. Renana Jabvala and myself wrote an article in India showing how this is an international phenomenon. If you target, you are slightly fraudulent because it doesn't work as it's on the paper. But we also have more shocks than at any time. We have more hazards. A hazard is something that is predictable but has costs. Anybody who's raised children knows that having a child these days is enormously expensive and involves an incredible number of risks. In my own country, they estimate that to raise one child from childhood to adulthood costs approximately £250,000. That's a lot of money for a lot of people. They can't afford it. If you want to understand the decline of fertility, start there. But we also have a loss of robustness. Robustness refers to immunity to shocks. You don't get hit by it. We saw that in COVID. And we see it in many, many respects. You're more exposed to being hit by shocks and hazards. And you have a diminished ability to cope with it. Particularly if you're in the precariat, and an even more diminished capacity to recover from those shocks. And to compound the problem, what we've seen in the last 40 years around the world is a loss of the commons. The commons were described historically as the poor's overcoat. In extremis, you had access to the commons where you could obtain some sort of social protection, informal in character. With privatization and commodification and financialization, the commons has been shrunk. And the poor and the precariat need the commons. The next giant is debt. We have more debt than at any time in history. Aristotle famously said that if you allow a build-up of debt, don't expect democracy to survive. And that's why he favored debt jubilees, where you wipe out all the debt at certain periods. But debt today, we talk about national debt, we talk about corporate debt, which is huge, which adds to the fragility of the economic system, and household debt. Household debt is huge, but what would you expect in a financialized economy? Finance thrives on people being in debt. That's what they exist to do. Now, debt means that shocks are much more threatening. And that leads to the fourth giant, which is stress. Due to insecurity, due to debt, due to labor intensification, working for labor without being paid, and in addition, the growth of the panopticon state, based on Jeremy Bentham's famous analysis of the panopticon. Basically, we feel that we're under surveillance, and more people respond to that by having to do things they don't want to do, but they fear if they don't, they may pay a price. Freedom is drifting away. The fifth giant is precarity, which I've just described. People losing the rights of citizenship, even in their own country. Talk of civil rights, and you will get a lot of laughter from members of the precariat. The sixth one is automation. I've been asked to speak on this in Silicon Valley, in Davos, the World Economic Forum, and elsewhere. I believe that, in fact, technological change, as Frederick said, cannot be resisted. We cannot be King Canute holding back the waves. I believe, in fact, that this is the first technological revolution in history which is generating more work, but less labor, which is a paradox. People are responding to the screen, to the touchpad, etc. But the worst part of the technological revolution is that it is inherently increasing inequality. It's increasing the flow of rental income to the owners of the technological patents and copyright, and diminishing that going to people who perform labor and work. And this is partly to do with the growth of the online, the cloud labor taking place. Millions and millions of people are today performing labor online in another country, the other side of the world. What's the size of the British labor force? We have no idea. Seriously, because if you pick up the phone and you want to get a service, you'll have a nicely spoken woman, and if you ask her, where are you? She'll tell you Goa, or Accra, or Kuala Lumpur. You know what I mean? We have a situation where millions of people are exporting labor without exporting themselves. That's a new phenomenon in the world. The seventh giant is the threat of extinction. We haven't mentioned this enough this morning, and I hope we continue to mention it more. We have global warming. We have climate deniers in positions of power. And we have a system in which more and more disasters, natural disasters, unpredictable in advance, are hitting whole communities, you and me included, at any time. And we don't have a politics of involving us in reproducing nature. We are part of nature. We shouldn't treat global warming and efforts to deal with the crisis of the ecology as an add-on. It's about how we live, how we want to live. It's about getting away from GDP growth. GDP was a term invented in the 1930s by Simon Kuznets in the United States to measure resources mobilizable for war. And as such, those wonderful men decided that women doing care were not mobilizable for war, so that the value of their work was given a value of 0. This is stupid. This is sexist. This is arbitrary. I show in my book on the politics of time that satellite accounts in a number of countries have shown that the value of unpaid care work done by women is more valuable than all industries except finance put together. And yet we give it a value of 0. And we talk about incentivizing to go out to work for people who are doing work. A Martian coming down to the world would look around and say, these are funny people. This is the most valuable form of work. You're caring for those you love. You're caring for your community. You're caring for the reproduction. You're caring for longevity, etc., etc. We need to reconceptualize what we mean by work. And the 8th giant is the one I warned about, thinking that I would hope to be wrong. The Financial Times said I was predicting it, and I wrote to the editor and I said, I didn't say predict, I said unless something's done, we'll get it. We're facing a world where neo-fascist populism is spreading like a wildfire. It stems from insecurity, it stems from anger, but it's frightening. It's leading to a new so-called soft eugenics. Eugenicists believe that you should look after the fit. The fit have to survive, and you don't have to worry about the vulnerable and the weak and the disabled, etc. Peter Thiel, who was my neighbor at that Bilderberg meeting, has said that democracy is incompatible with freedom, his freedom. And the reason is that the disabled, the vulnerable, women, the precariat, they will vote for policies of redistribution. They will vote for policies to make it possible that more and more people can have a life worth living. That's incompatible with the plutocrats like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and a whole lot of people in the tech finance circles. So we need a new approach, in my view. And this leads to my final few remarks, which is I believe that if you accept that we need a vaccine for COVID, a vaccine for measles, a vaccine for any illness, we need a social vaccine for insecurity. We need a system that says ex ante, you have security. Not a promise which is an unreal promise that if something goes wrong, you will have something, but a guarantee you as a citizen, you as a human being, you as a woman, you as a man, you a person with disabilities, you're a child, you all have the right to this social vaccine. And I believe that is where basic income will become an anchor of a new social protection system in the world. Its idea, briefly define it, it will be a periodic, modest payment given to every individual as a right, unconditional on whatever you're doing, unconditional on your marital status, paid individually, so it's paid equally for a man and a woman, and it's unconditional in behavioral terms. I've shown that it's very easy to pay for it at a modest level. And the important thing at this stage is to be on the road in that direction rather than in the road going in the opposite direction. It's a matter of common justice. If we allowed private inheritance of private wealth, we should allow for the shared public inheritance of public wealth. Even someone like Buffett says he knows that only a minority of his income is due to his efforts. Most is due to the efforts of many generations before us. I like that argument because it means you can justify it as a matter of justice. It's also a matter of freedom, but as a matter of ecological justice as well. Ecological justice means the wealthy create the pollution and are destroying the planet. The poor pay the heaviest price in morbidity, reduced longevity, etc. A basic income would be a compensatory sort of payment. In terms of freedom, every politician says they believe in freedom, but you can't be free if you're so desperate and so insecure that you just have to do whatever you're told. For a woman, freedom does not come from being able to do something if her husband or father says so. Freedom means doing it because you yourself want to do it. But it's also a matter of basic security. Basic security is a human need, and it's a public good. And it's a superior public good because if you have more and more people with basic security, it's increased for all of us. It's easy to show that. But it will also combat a drift to populism, which stems from people's fears, anxieties, and neuroses. Now, you're listening to a man who's had the rare privilege of being able to put into practice what he's preached, if you like, over his career. We have now done pilots and experiments in numerous countries. At the moment, there are approximately 100 experiments that I know about, and some of which I've been involved, ongoing in various countries. We have a book here based on the big Indian pilot we did. We've done it in Africa, we've got one going in Brazil, we've got them in the United States, in Canada, in Finland. We just finished one in Wales. And I want to tell you that even though the methodologies differ and the size of the samples differ and the quality of the data differ, what comes across is a remarkably consistent narrative. The first and most important finding of every pilot that I've seen and been involved in is that it improves mental and physical health, particularly mental health. It leads to in poor areas, people taking antibiotics to the full end of treatment. It leads to access to health care. It leads to better practices. It leads to better child nutrition, better diets. By having better diets, it improves school performance. I remember going to the kampongs, and I was talking last night to several Malaysian friends, asking if things had changed dramatically. Of course, there have been improvements, but in villages and rural communities, the ability to make choices can make huge differences to nutrition and to health. And you don't know as a bureaucrat what's the best, because it varies with different people. It leads to better sanitation, better social solidarity in efforts to improve local sanitation. It leads, and I want, please, if you don't listen to anything else I say, please listen to the following statement. A basic income leads to more work, not less. It's the biggest prejudice that I hear again and again and again, usually from rich people who've had a very comfortable life, had pocket money as children, etc. It leads to more work, not less. And it leads to more care work, more voluntary work, more community work, more productive work. People have more energy, more confidence, they take more risks. And it improves women's status. We found that women who receive a basic income, if they're in abusive relationships, they're more likely to walk out and say, go away. That's freedom. That's freedom. And it leads to people with disabilities to have dignity. That's why I insisted on the front page of this book on our Indian pilots that a woman who was disabled and she didn't have a sari or anything, at the end of the pilot, 2 years afterwards, she was an independent producer in her community. I believe that Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, can become a leader in moving us towards societies with basic income. And I want to conclude by mentioning a story. In 2016, our network, Bien, anybody can join, we have some Malaysian members, we had our Congress in Seoul. And a man came up to me and he said, Dr. Stanning, please tell me. I don't understand basic income. Please tell me. He asked all the standard questions. I answered. At the end of it, he said, I'm going to stand for governor of my province. I said, oh, okay, good luck. And he went off. And he said, would you write a newspaper article? I said, yes, sure. So he went off. The next thing I heard is he'd been elected governor of his province, Gyeonggi, and he'd introduced a basic income for all young people in his province. 125,000 introduced it. Then we had our next Congress, next but one, in Hyderabad. This time he came, 2019. And he came up to me and with his entourage then, I mean, he was an important politician by this stage, and he said, I'm going to stand for president. I said, really? Yes, I'm going to stand for president, saying I'm going to introduce a basic income. I said, well, good luck. Great. Then we had a next Congress, 2022. He came to that Congress. He came to the front. He stood up and he stood there and he said, I failed. And I asked to go to the rostrum, and I went up and I said, you didn't fail. You got 49.5% of the vote. Most politicians would give their left arm for 49.5% of the vote. Shortly afterwards, he was stabbed in the street. We thought he was going to die, but he didn't. 2 weeks ago, he was elected president of South Korea. I wish him well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Standing, for that insightful contribution. And battling the 8 giants, as you mentioned, with certainly a bold policy proposition, the social vaccine of a basic income. Your suggestion to rename Pantai Cahaya Bulan has also been duly noted. Professor Standing will be a member of the upcoming panel session along with the previous 2 speakers, so do look forward to hearing from him again shortly.